I'm sure arrival and registration has been done. We would like to open our event with welcome remarks from Lucy Chajiwa. And I think from there we will then have, I'd like to do something that is not really conventional, and I'll impose that she gives us an opening prayer as part of her welcome remarks. And I think that would really give us a warm welcome as a package. So may I please have Lucy Chajiwa coming up forward.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Shall we pray? Father God, in the name of Jesus, we just want to thank you, my Lord, for today. For this is the day that you have made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. In the mighty name of Jesus, we just want to thank you, my Lord, for the proceedings for the day at JCT. We just want to thank you, my Lord, that you've already gone ahead of us. You've ordered our footsteps. We just want to thank you, my Lord, that each and everything that is going to happen today, my Lord, it is really in your hands. We just want to thank you in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I would like to recognize Professor Julie Stewart, the director of the Women's Law Center, who is our guest today. The directors and heads of civil society organizations here represented, representatives of the civil society organizations, the national heads of the victim-friendly system and the pre-trial diversion program, the dean of the Faculty of Law and the Zimbabwe Ezekiel Guti University of Faculty of Law, development partners and supporters of our work, junior members of parliament, students from various schools and from the Zimbabwe Ezekiel Guti University Faculty of Law, members of the media. It gives me great pleasure to stand before you to welcome you to this event. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of Justice for Children, I would like to thank you for gracing us with your presence. We are humbled, and it warms our hearts when so many of our friends, colleagues, and associates whose support of our work come together to celebrate with us. Thank you. Allow me to thank the organizers of this event, the JCT staff members. They work tirelessly to make this day a success. The publication that we are gathered here to launch could not have come at a better time than it is now. We have all been following the debates and discussions around the age of consent and the access to sexual and reproductive health care for children. As child rights practitioners, it is important that we add our voices in the discussion and debate. Importantly, it is crucial that that voice we add is informed by our experiences and practices in dealing with children. It is within this context that JCT has decided to make this important contribution to that discourse. As an institution with legal expertise, you will find that significant input is that from legal lenses. This is important so that the discussion in the mainstream does not only manifest in a one-dimensional manner, not even bi-dimensional manner, but a multi-dimensional manner. You have all been invited because you are critical stakeholders in this discourse. It is you that are engaged and will engage in that debate. The communities and constituencies you serve look up to you for thought, leadership, and guidance. Today, through the publication, we are launching today, JCT is giving you another tool that will help you to engage. Ultimately, the goal is simply to try and find the best possible way to protect children against sexual exploitation, youthful influences, practices, and laws and policies that may work against the best interest of the child, even though the intention may be to protect the children. Age of consent to sexual intercourse and access to sexual and reproductive health services for children is not a simple and easy debate, though it must be talked about, because children need protection and they need it here and now. Finally, in a special way, I want to welcome the children who are here. We are gathered here for you. The publication we are launching today is about you, and it is for you. Injustice for children, and in the many organizations, offices, and institutions represented here, you have allies. Therefore, I would like to invite you children to make your voice to be heard, participate and engage, not just in the discussion today, but also in the wider discourse that is taking place at a national level. That also goes to the rest of us. Let us partake in this event, enjoy the presentations and discussions, and let's engage. I thank you.
Judith Lewis Herman once said, "Because the child does not have the power to withhold consent, she does not have the power to grant it. But what is a child? Who is granting the consent? What is age of consent? And why is it really a pertinent issue right now?" So coming up next is a presentation that is going to unfold all these issues to us, that will really unpack why we're here, why the publication was made, and how far we have gone as a country in terms of research around this issue. May we please put our hands together for Petronella, the Director for Justice for Children, the people who have made this possible today. Petronella.
Good afternoon to you all, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and friends from civic society, friends from government departments, and also friends from the various schools and colleges around here. Allow me this afternoon to talk about why, as Justice for Children, we decided to engage into this discussion paper. As Justice for Children, we are lawyers for children. A lot of our time we are in the courts representing children. But one of the dilemmas that we face is we meet a child who has been sexually abused. We also meet a child who has abused. So in most cases, we are faced with scenarios where it's either we've got a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old who are going through the courts of law, seeking services in a case where there has been sexual violence. So it is these cases and other cases of a similar nature that have made JCT to look into this discourse. I'll share with you one of the cases that really motivated us to say, I think we need to do something. It's a case involving Solomon and Mutsai. These people were at the same school. Solomon was a 15-year-old, and not their real names. And Mutsai is a 13-year-old girl. And these were neighbors, and they entered into a relationship. They dated for about 6 months, and within the period, in their 6 months of the relationship, they had a sexual relationship. It so happened that one day, Mutsai's mother went to their rural home to attend a funeral. She came a day earlier, and when she got home, she had her keys. She opened the door and went into the daughter's bedroom, where she found the daughter in bed with Solomon. So as she was trying to understand what was happening, as she was going into the house, the young boy sneaked out and went out. So she asked their daughter, "What's happening here?" The daughter said, "I've been raped." This is the message that she told her mother. "This guy forced himself into this house and he raped me. That's why you found him here." So as a result of that, the mother rushed to the police station to report, and then they reported the matter. She stuck by her guns that she had been raped. It was only when they were in court, when she noted that the mother was not in, when she was giving evidence, that she then indicated that in actual fact, he was my boyfriend. So luckily, the boy was represented by a lawyer, and then the lawyer had to do his work to ensure that this guy is released from this court process. So we've got a number of young boys and girls who are either going through the court system because they were in a love relationship, and when reality did unfold, the girls would say, "I was raped." And we also have situations where young girls and men go into relationships, and then we have a situation where the child is exploited. So the reason why, as Justice for Children, we thought it was necessary to look into this, we noted a lot of people don't know the laws that are there to protect children. In cases where they are known, they don't know the provisions that are there to protect the children. And in those situations where somebody is accused of rape, maybe a young boy, or, they end up sometimes going into prison because they failed to have a lawyer who stand on their side to represent them. It is in light of this that, as Justice for Children, we feel we need to discuss this topic. We need to discuss this topic in line with what is happening at the border posts, the prostitution that is happening in places like Epworth, how boys and girls are interacting and having relationships, yet they are still young and they don't understand what is happening to them. It is on that basis that we are saying, as Justice for Children, those who are in the development sector, how do you deal with a relationship such as Solo and Mutai's relationship? In cases where there is pregnancy, how do you deal with it? Do you take the child through the court process? But remember, there are 3 children now involved: the girl, the boy, and the unborn child. How then, as development practitioners, use the laws that are there and the systems and policies that are there to protect children? So this discussion paper is really meant to try and see what are some of the challenges and how can we deal with them, and what does the law say, and does the law come into influence our realities as communities, or maybe we need to go a step further to see how can we assist children, how can we protect them, whilst at the same time ensuring that the best interest of the children are upheld. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope from the presentation that is coming, we'll be able to see what are some of the issues that this discussion paper tackles.
I think the story that we have just been told is not a new one, is it? We have heard stories like these, and we have even heard people singing songs about them. As I was sitting there, I'm a lover of Marasta, and I'm a ghetto youthie at heart. And so I just thought of the song by Freeman that says, "Imboti ka 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 mukomana ka ka ka." I see smiles, I see nods. What does this mean? We all know the song. Do you know what it is about? It is about a young man who's falsely accused of rape, And only when they get to the court case and to the judge, and the judge really digs deep, only to find that this young man also was in a relationship with the mother, and now it's a ploy to fix him for whatever reason, that the young girl goes to court and says, I was raped. And so the judge then says, Aiwa, visai simbi is rasta vayende kumba. So, it's in court, but then we still feel the Rasta youth in the vibe there. Before we go to the next presentation, for those that are Netflix lovers like me, there's a very emotional series that is doing the circles. It's called When They See Us. It's 5 young men, two aged 12, another aged 14. I think there's a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. They are falsely accused of rape, and they serve 9 years. The younger one served 9 years, and the older one serves 14 years, only for them to then be told that actually it was a false case and the one who actually did it confesses. So I think our justice system needs to play a strong role to ensure that things like that do not really happen to us all. And the age of consent is a very pertinent issue that can put a lot of people behind bars. Yet, our reality today says something different. So maybe to hear the reality today, we will have the next speaker, Musa Kika from Justice for Children, who will really tell us what the issues are now and what the challenges are now around the age of consent. As I go down, my Rasta lovers, ngatimbo imbai imboti ga ga ga. Am I the only one? I'm hearing whispers. Let us not be shy, eh? Thank you, Musa.
Thank you, Ashley. I don't hear the singing. What happened? All right. Thank you, Ashley. And thanks to Ms. Chajiwa and Ms. Nyamapene who came before me. Welcome. My name is Musa. I'm a lawyer here at Justice for Children. The task that I have is just to take us through, in the next few minutes, the issues and challenges that we face or that we have as a society when it comes to children, the age of consent, access to sexual and reproductive health services, as well as young people who have sexual intercourse with other young people, right? These are issues, as we understand them, that are intertwined and interconnected. You really can't discuss them separately, which is why we decided to put together a resource which I believe we are all going to enjoy and benefit from. In a short while, we are all going to receive a copy of the publication. The title of this publication is Age of Consent, Sexual Intercourse with Young Persons, and Access to Sexual and Reproductive Health Care in Zimbabwe. So I'm not going to spoil your reading experience by telling you what is in this book in detail, but what I'm going to do is just to give prompts and indications of the issues and challenges that emerge, which we all cover in quite some detail in this publication. And I'll start at the beginning. Towards the end, if you look at your programs, we are going to have a section on a discussion session, where we are going to have some question and answers, and also we hear some comments from you. So I'll start from the very beginning, what we mean when we speak of the age of consent. Maybe just as a background, this publication began as a legal opinion. It turned into a presentation within Justice for Children for our staff members. And then we decided to develop it into a publication. That's the history of it. So the beginning, what is age of consent? So when we speak of age of consent, we are speaking of the age below which a person is not allowed by the law to consent to sexual activity. The law recognizes the minority of the person, the vulnerability of the person, and accepts that this person can't make an informed choice to consent to sexual activity. Do they even understand what sexual activity means? So that's the age of consent. Where do you find the age of consent in Zimbabwe, and what is the age of consent in Zimbabwe? This is not a rhetoric question. People may think it's straightforward, but you hear even debates amongst lawyers, right? The age of consent in Zimbabwe is 16. We would all know this because it was in the media recently. There was a lot of discussion about it. The age of consent in Zimbabwe is 16. Where do we get the age 16? If you read our statutes or the constitution, you won't find anywhere where it says the age of consent is 16. Where do we get it? We get it in the criminal statutes, right? Specifically, the Criminal Code, the Criminal Law Codification and Reform Act, Section 70 and Section 61, subsection 1. If you read those two sections together, you would then get to understand that, okay, the age of consent is 16. You actually won't find a clause which says the age of consent is 16. And this is the standard worldwide. You won't find, even in other countries, that stipulation. You infer or you read it from the criminal statutes. So that's what we mean when we speak of the age of consent. But why is it important? You know, why should we make noise about the age of consent? And I will give you 4 things. The first is that it tells us what sexual offenses are there when it comes to children. For you to be able to say this minor was sexually violated, right, in one way or the other, age comes into play. You have already used the word minor, right? Age comes into play. So for us to have that demarcation of sexual offenses involving minors, we need to have that age of consent. Number 2, very critical, very controversial, access to sexual and reproductive health care. Age of consent has a bearing to that, as I will explain a little bit later on. Number 3, criminal liability of children when it comes to sexual activity that occurs between children. Ms. Nyamapene has raised it, Ashley raised it, about the cases that we deal with. Personally, as a child rights lawyer, I would say most of the cases that I have dealt with involving children accused of criminal offenses have to do with sexual offenses, representing children who are accused of rape, having sexual intercourse with a minor, indecent assault, etc. The point I'm making is it is rife in our society, and age of consent is important in that respect. The 4th thing is the intersection between age of consent and marriages, the issue of child marriages. We have a very interesting scenario in our society. Age of consent is 16, minority is 18. Minors are not allowed to enter into marriages in terms of Section 78 of the Constitution, but there is a group of 16 and 17-year-olds who are allowed to have sexual intercourse. I'm not making a comment about it. I'm just telling you, some issues where the age of consent issue is important, right? So just a little bit about what we cover in this book. Like I said, sexual age of consent is defined in Section 70 and 61 of the Criminal Code. If you read those sections, and I would add Section 64 to that, you would also find something interesting. The law says if someone has sexual intercourse with a minor, or a young person, that is the word that is used in the statute, young person being someone below the age of 16. If you have sexual intercourse with a young person, which is someone below the age of 16, and they have consented to it, capture this properly, they have consented to it, but we are saying age of consent is what? 16. So we are saying someone below the age of 16 and they have consented to it, the offense is not rape, right? Because the young person has agreed to it. It's not rape, instead it's another creature code having sexual intercourse with a young person, which is different from rape. Okay, and that is the offense in terms of Section 70, rape is Section 65. The law then goes on to say in Section 64, if someone has sexual intercourse with a minor below the age of 12, that's rape, right? What it means is that absolute protection in terms of our law is only granted to those who are below the age of 12, right? That is the group that is only given absolute protection. You will find more of that in the book. If you read Section 70, you also find something very interesting. In the phrasing of the offense, it says it's an offense to have extramarital sexual intercourse with a young person, being a person below the age of 16. What it means is that it would be a defense to say, I was married to this 14-year-old. Do you get that? But, our Constitution then comes and says in Section 78, you cannot marry or get married unless you are the age of 18, right? We currently have the Marriages Bill, which is also going to codify that in statute. So what it means is that that phrasing within the criminal code is now redundant, and is not in line with our constitution. Young people cannot be married. Like I said earlier, if you are under 18, you can't be married, you can't marry. All right. So how do other countries fare with the age of consent? Are we the only ones grappling with the age of consent? No, it's a global phenomenon. So all countries in the world, I'll take that back. Most countries in the world have an age of consent, right? The reason why I say I'm taking back the all is because in our research, we found that there are 13 countries which do not specify an age of consent. But what they say is you can't have sexual intercourse unless and until you're married. So if you get married at 30, you start there. 13 of those countries, mostly countries with Islamic populations, North Africa, Asia, the Middle East, etc. What we found is that generally you won't find patterns across the globe whereby you can say, well, in Africa, generally the age of consent is this, in Europe it's this, in the US it's this. It's just all over the place. I'm just going to give you a breakdown. The lowest age of consent in the world is 11. There's a country with age of consent that is at 11. The highest is 21. And then there are those 13 nations which say whenever you get married, that's where it starts. Okay, so we have about 2 countries that are at 12. We have some countries that are at 13. We have 32 countries that are at 14. 26 countries that are at 15. We have 76 countries that are at 16, which includes Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is part of those 76. So the majority of the countries in the world are at 76. We have a few countries that are at 17. We have about 40 countries that are at 18. And then there are only 3 countries that are above 18, excluding those 13 that I mentioned. So that's basically a snapshot of the status quo when it comes to age of consent globally. And then you have countries that have a gendered age of consent, differentiation between age of consent for boys and age of consent for girls. You have countries that do that. In Malawi today, having sexual intercourse with a minor, which is called defilement in Malawian statutes, it only applies to girls, not young boys. So only girls are protected with defilement laws, or what we call having sexual intercourse with a minor, Section 70 in our law. Other countries used to have that, they abolished it, such as Angola, etc. But then in terms of consensus that is building up internationally, there are recommendations. Number one, the recommendation is that countries should clearly provide the age of consent to sexual activity in law. Clearly provide for the age of consent. I said it's derived from criminal statutes. That's what I said, right? So this recommendation is saying age of consent must be clearly articulated in the law. Recommendation number 2, the age of consent to sexual activity should be appropriate, taking into account the evolving capacity, age, and maturity of young persons. And then the last one is that the age of consent to sexual activity should be non-discriminatory on the basis of, among other things, gender and marital status. Right. All right. So moving on to the next thing, access to sexual reproductive health, care, and age of consent. We ask a question in the book, and we spent a few pages trying to answer that. And the question is age of consent and access to sexual and reproductive health care mutually exclusive? Are the two mutually exclusive? In other words, is it possible to say, okay, the age of consent is 16, but if you are 15, you can access sexual and reproductive health care? Can these two work together? It's a question that we pose. We attempt to discuss it. And again, what I will mention is that the book the publication doesn't seek to be prescriptive, but it seeks to trigger debate and discussion with a view that people discuss and debate with a whole range of views and viewpoints from the social side, psychological side, legal side, etc. I'll mention 3 things there. The first one is a realization of the reality that children are actually engaging in sexual activity in our society. That is the reality of the day, whether we accept it, whether we want to accept it or not. What it means is that the system has to respond appropriately with a view to protect children. But that is the reality that obtains. Number two, in terms of our law, there is the right to health. There is the general right to health clause in our constitution. I believe it's section 76, which says every citizen and permanent resident of Zimbabwe has the right to have access to basic healthcare services, including reproductive healthcare services. It says everyone, not adults or children, or it says everyone. And then you go to section 81, which provides for the rights of children. Section 81 also provides for the right to health. It says every child, that is to say every boy and girl under the age of 18 years, has the right to education, healthcare services, nutrition, and shelter. It doesn't break down what healthcare services mean, but already section 76 breaks that down. So whatever is stated there, children are also entitled to that. All right, so the right to health, that's what our law says. But above that, Zimbabwe is a signatory to the UNCRC, the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the African Charter as well. We get some important guidance from the Committee on the Rights of the Child, which is the body that enforces the UNCRC. And I would like to refer you to General Comment 15, where the committee discusses the right to health. And I want to quote this verbatim. Children's right to health contains a set of freedoms and entitlements. The freedoms, which are of increasing importance in accordance with the growing capacity and maturity, include the right to control one's health and body, including sexual and reproductive freedom to make responsible choices. The entitlements include access to a range of facilities, goods, services, and conditions that provide equality of opportunity for every child to enjoy the highest attainable standard of health. And the comment goes on and on to provide for protections that must be there for children as they access these services. So I'm just mentioning all this just to place the right to health in context and how we locate access to sexual and reproductive health care for children. And then lastly, under that point, the best interest of the child. Ultimately, the law tells us, including the UNCRC, that the best interests of the child are of paramount importance in anything that is done concerning children. But then as lawyers, we then also started thinking about other things that are attendant. And we thought of, okay, minors accessing sexual and reproductive health care as minors. The law says as a minor, you can't enter into a binding contract. The law says as a minor, you don't have capacity to sue anyone. You can't go to court to sue anyone. What happens in the case of medical negligence when a young person has gone to access sexual and reproductive health care on their own, and then medical negligence happens? How do we protect our children legally? That's a question. And then the next thing is sexual intercourse, including young people. This one has been dealt with. In terms of our law, if young people or young persons, that is between the ages of 12 and 16, sexual intercourse or any sexual activity which is consensual, there is no criminal offense. There is no criminal offense. That is important. What it means is that there is an assumption or a presumption that children shouldn't or can't access sexual and reproductive health care on their own because they are not involved in sexual activity. But then there is this position in our law which actually provides a group that can have sexual intercourse among themselves consensually. What are we saying about that group and access to the health care that is then needed along with that? In terms of our law previously, there was no stipulation that this group is not criminalized. It used to be judgments. There were very important judgments from, I think, Justice Chitakunye, Justice Kuchka, who ruled in one of the cases, State versus CF. That was a 2011 case, that this group is not penalized when they do sexual activity in a consensual manner. But then that was codified in statute in 2016 when we did amendments to the criminal code. There was inserted section 70, subsection 2, paragraph A, which is where you find that position that young people between 12 and 16 who have consensual sexual activity are not committing any criminal offense. All right. And then tied to that, we have the 16 to 18 age group. In terms of our constitution, section 81, subsection 1, children are defined as people below the age of 18, right? A boy or girl below the age of 18. So we said age of consent is 16, and we said this protection in section 70 of the code is given to children who are between 12 and 16. The question then is, how about those children which we acknowledge are children between 17 and 18, that gap 16, 17, just before they turn 18? What protection is there for those children when they engage in consensual sexual activity with another minor? Currently, in terms of our law, they are not protected. That's the group that I tell you that we spend a lot of time representing in courts, because the reality is it's happening. It's happening. Okay. Other countries have tried to solve this by introducing what they call Romeo and Juliet clauses. That's the term they use in America. Here in Africa, we call them clause in age exemptions or clause in age ranges, whereby the law says, okay, as long as you are a child, if the person you have had consensual sexual intercourse with is not more than 2 years or more than 3 years younger than you, and then there is no offense. What that means is it then protects that group between 16 and 18. Right? Namibia does it. In Namibia, the range is 3 years. South Africa does it. In South Africa, the range is 2 years. In the US, it changes from state to state. In Zimbabwe, we currently don't have that. But we have important pronouncements that have been made by our courts, particularly one judgment by Justice Tsanga, who comes down heavily against criminalizing consensual sexual activity amongst young people. She says the law doesn't operate in a vacuum. It has to take into account the other influences around this. And the responses should center around teaching children about abstinence, sexual and reproductive health education and information to children, and other rehabilitative and reformative methods as opposed to criminalizing. And she goes on to say, well, when you criminalize a 17-year-old who's having sexual intercourse consensual with a 16-year-old, it's a lover boy kind of situation. That's the word that she uses in the judgment. Again, we discussed this quite extensively in the publication. And then statutory defense to Section 70. So Section 70, I said that's the provision that deals with having sexual intercourse with a minor. And we have spoken about age of consent. In our law, you then find something also interesting. Section 70, subsection 3, it says it's a defense to an offense of having sexual intercourse with a young person if you come and say, I believed she was above 16. That's a defense in terms of our statute. The law then goes on to say, but provided that physical appearance alone does not make it. So you can't then say, she looked older, so I believed. There has to be more. But basically the question he poses is, what does it mean when we say age of consent is 16? But someone can actually come having slept with a 15-year-old and then say, I believed she was older. And then they go. The question that we ask is it a constitutional defense? Meaning, does that defense conform, or is it in line with the Constitution? Because the Constitution in Section 2 says it's the supreme law of the land, and any law that is inconsistent with it is invalid. So we ask the question, is that statutory defense unconstitutional? And we go on to explore the position in Malawi, the position in Botswana, and I think in South Africa as well, in the publication. And then finally, opportunities. So what opportunities do we have to try and resolve some of these issues, at least insofar as law is concerned? And I reflect on two things. Number one, the Children's Amendment Bill of 2017, which is seeking to amend the Children's Act. And then the Education Amendment Bill, which is currently at the consultation stages. Most of you would have known of this from the press releases coming out. So with the Children's Bill, there are three provisions that I pick of interest. The first is that there is a provision that relates to protection of children from sexual grooming, and it speaks about showing children pornographic material, etc. There is a provision that addresses that. The second relevant provision that I pick is the creation of a sex offenders register. So this bill is proposing a sex offenders register in Zimbabwe. We currently don't have. The question that I have then is, or the concern, is that there is that 16 to 18 age group, which I said are minors. But if they are convicted, they are getting into that sex offenders register. When we speak of child protection and best interest, what are we saying? It's just a concern. The third relevant provision, which I pick, and quite important to this, relates to medical examination and treatment of children and young persons. And I want to quote this. It reads, "Any person who denies a child medical treatment or access to medical treatment shall be guilty of an offense and liable to a fine not exceeding level 10 or to imprisonment for a period not exceeding 5 years or to both such fine and imprisonment." If you read this, it's quite clear. And it might then get you to ask, so what's the problem? Children are then going to be allowed to access these services. But if you read the health statutes in the country, they are the ones that stipulate age-related restrictions or barriers to accessing certain medication and certain processes and procedures, including just going to buy certain medicine in a pharmacy. A 16-year-old is not allowed in terms of the law with respect to a certain category of medicine. So if you were to read this with existing legislation, what you pick immediately is conflict, right? Conflict and confusion being introduced. But again, this provision is capable of a second reading. And that reading is that the person who denies medical access or treatment to a child is only guilty if they deny a child who comes, but the child coming while conforming to the already existing law. What it means is the child is already coming with adult consent or with a prescription. Only then is the person who denies criminalized. So what I'm saying is that it's ambiguous, right? It's ambiguous and it's something that needs revisiting. It doesn't solve the issue or the challenge that we have currently with access to sexual and reproductive health for children. And then the second bill, I say the Education Amendment Bill of 2019, and there I picked two things which I think are relevant. Number one is that the bill is proposing appointment of sexual and reproductive health educators in schools. Basically what it says is that we want our children to now be taught issues to do with sexual and reproductive health in schools. Right? I said earlier on that the judgment by Justice Tsanga in the High Court said, well, instead of criminalizing, sensitize them on these things. So this bill took that and is now saying we have to appoint specially trained expert educators to deal with this in schools. To me, what it does is that it's recognition that, well, children are actually engaging and we need to respond in a particular way. So that's recognition as I see it. The second provision that I see relevant is that there is a proposal to protect girl children who fall pregnant from being expelled in schools. I said children between 12 and 16 are allowed in terms of the law to have sexual intercourse without attracting criminal sanction. What if the girl falls pregnant? Currently, they are not allowed in school. So this bill then says it protects such children from being expelled. Again, to me, without making a comment on that, to me, it's simply acknowledgement or corroboration of that realization that our children are actually engaging in this. How best can we then protect them so that their other rights are not infringed or taken away from? Because once that child is expelled, they are no longer in school. We are now talking about the right to education and issues there. So more and more rights then continue being cut back. So to me, without making a comment on this, there is just realization and acceptance that this is reality and how do we respond to that. So I would like to end by reading the conclusion that we make in this publication. The debate on age of consent is not a simplistic one. For it to bear fruit, which is to increase protection to children, the discourse must be evidence-based, founded on the practical realities and experiences of children in our society. Children must no doubt be protected from sexual exploitation and sexual predators. children must also be treated differently in cases of children having sexual intercourse with other children in non-exploitative circumstances. At the same time, children must be accorded access to sexual and reproductive health services, as well as age-appropriate sex education and counseling. A lot of issues involved are policy decisions that require a proper reality check, as law does not act and should not act in a vacuum, devoid of the lived realities and experiences of society. Rather, such policy decisions must be based on goals and aspirations that the society sets for itself, predicated on the society's priorities. Whatever those priorities may be, greater protection of children should rank high up. That's the conclusion we make. But one thing that I'm also picking that I ought to have indicated is that fundamentally at the core of it, issues of age of consent are policy issues. It's a policy decision that a country makes and says this is how we want to move. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that detailed insight into what we are here for today. I think it's very important not to speak for the children, but to have them have their say on this issue. At the end of the day, it is about them. We can stand for them in the gap. We can try to speak out for the policymakers to hear, but then if we do not hear their voice and what they really want and hear it from them, then we are not doing anything. It is always said, nothing for us without. Nothing for us without. I thought I'd hear the us louder from the esteemed row that is just sitting over there. Nothing for us without. Thank you very much. Coming up next is a representative from the Junior Parliament to give us what young people are saying about the age of consent. The floor is yours, Honourables.
Thank you so much. Once again, a pleasant day to you all, ladies and gentlemen. Like she has already said, nothing without us is not for us. So my name is Honorable Thandeka Mesembra. I am the Junior Minister of Health and Child Care. So I'm just going to break down a little bit of what we understand as children when it comes to the age of consent, things to do with sexual and reproductive health rights. So from my understanding and from what I've gathered from some of my colleagues, the age of consent is when one can legally engage into sexual activities. And we are saying that so has already been alluded to by the lawyer, Musa Kika. He said that it is at 16. But then we are saying that why not raise it up to 18 for the following reasons. This way there'll be harmony with the Constitution, which describes a child as anyone who's under the age of 18, regardless of their gender. It also gives time for us as children to grow mentally, physically, and psychologically, because when you're under the age of 16, we're saying that maybe you do not know what you really want to do with your life. So by the time you get to 18, most probably things being normal, you're done with your A-levels. You now know what you want to do. And this way, we also find a way to do away with unwanted teenage pregnancies, illegal termination of pregnancy, high mortality rates, school dropouts, and spread of STIs, because most of children who engage in sexual activities do it from an uninformed perspective. Also, a person can only be eligible to marriage when they are at 18. So it means that when you engage into sex with someone who is an adult and then you're a minor, it means that we are basically measuring the minor. We are afraid of marriage, yet we are allowing them to indulge into sexual activities. How about they get pregnant? How are we going to protect that child? Now moving on, looking at SRH services, which are sexual reproductive health care. As already been said, everyone has got the right to health, which means that as children as well, these services must be provided to us because we need this information. Things to do with sexuality and sex are not things that we can talk about at a family setup. It's a taboo, but then we need to know about it because children are doing it, and we need protection. We need to be informed. We need to know what are the repercussions of indulging into sexual activities, and what are we supposed to do to protect ourselves? What is it that we have to know about sex and issues to do with it? So we are saying that let it be at least be accessed from the age of 12. Why? Because at this age, those issues about sexuality, they make sense, because that is the age where one becomes an adolescent, where a lot of changes are happening physically. Now, and then we are also saying that there are a lot of misconceptions when it comes to sex and sexual reproductive health rights. As children, we tend to discuss it in schools and everywhere, and there are myths that are around it. Some of the myths are that sex is a way of proving love, but then is it the true and actual fact? And then unprotected sex is better than using barrier methods, which are condoms. Is this true? What are the repercussions of doing that? And then that male circumcision is actually a way of preventing STIs. So we are saying that all these misconceptions need to be rectified, and we need to be informed about this, so that we have got a clear position of what we want to know, such that when you indulge into sexual activities, you are doing it from an informed position. I'm going to hand over to Leslie, who is going to talk about the way of protecting children. Thank you.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. What I want to talk about today is about how children are vulnerable to sexual exploitation. Now, we see that, okay, let me give you a case study of the Matapi or Majubek areas in Mbare. You see that over 50% of children that are living there, by the time they reach 16, they'll be sexually active. But then the thing is that they are saying that it is better to die of AIDS than to die of hunger. So this leads them into doing sexual activities simply because they know the poverty that surrounds them. Henceforth, it would be better to just die of AIDS because they know they can access the ARVs, but rather they can't access food. So they say that it is better to die with HIV than to die of hunger. But is that the right thing that we are teaching our children? We are saying that as children, we need protection from exploitation. We need protection from old men who are taking advantage of children, promising them food, promising them goods, and all those things. And we know that as children, we tend to experiment a lot. A 16-year-old boy like myself can experiment with a 15-year-old girl. But then after we've experimented, does that mean that we are guilty of crime? As Musa has already illustrated, he clearly stated that it would be better that we just, okay, he didn't exactly say those words, but then we are saying that it would be better if we get some guidance and counseling, so that we may know that there are some disadvantages to being sexually active at a young age, so that even in schools, guidance and counseling must be made compulsory in terms of sexual and reproductive health education. We are saying that as children, we need to know the consequences of entering into sexual intercourse, in indulging in sex. Because I personally learned at Harare High School, a school that is located near Mbare Msika. And then you see a 14-year-old girl in Form 2 being expelled from school simply because she's now pregnant and she has had sex with someone who is in Form 4. Now, we are saying that we need protection from such instances. And finally, we are saying that as children, we face a lot of troubles accessing some of these things. For example, condoms, they were initially said that they would be available in schools. But then you see that it was just like a short phase where condoms were made available in schools. But then right now, there are no condoms in schools. And then we're saying we know that children, they are indulging in sexual activities. But then if you're given the condoms, you can protect yourselves from STIs. So it's better to help them prevent these things, because we know that we are not abstaining from sex. Most children are not abstaining from sex. So isn't it better to just assist them so that they may not fall sick also? Because it would be worse to fall pregnant and then to get an STI. But it is better to be sexually active, but then you're protected. So as children, you're saying that please give us these resources and protect us from adults. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we rest our case.
Sade kutambisa nguva yedare mfana une musika.
DJ. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So the DJ has decided to listen to my plea and play the song, eh? Much to the benefit of all the smiles that I was seeing here and the notes that I'm still seeing. So thank you very much. And I think with that mouthful, we have heard the needs and the demands that are surrounding our children. The world is demanding so much from them and taking so much from them as well. And we really need to shield and shelter them from all these atrocities. So with this mouthful and all that we have heard, I think it is now a beautiful chance to just let us marinate in it while we have the marimba guys give us a beautiful song. May we please have the marimba band?
Lighthouse, a division of SlyMedia, are available at your disposal for your wedding videos and pictures. Our experience is second to none. To view our sample or to book us, call or WhatsApp on 0773 684 183 or email slymediastreaming@gmail.com.
One, two.
Kuvira kare ndichikuda asi baba vako vakandisunda zvakangodaro tekokota dzamara mai vangu vazobvunza
Thank you very much for the music. Just an announcement for the rooms of convenience. You can use the signs that are just there, or you just follow the wall right up to the end there. That's where our toilets are for both ladies and gents. You just follow the signs. So thank you very much to the beautiful music. Up next, we're going to have our keynote address. And our keynote address is going to be given to us by Professor Julie Stewart, the Director for Southern and Eastern Africa Regional Center for Women's Law. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Professor Julie Stewart. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. What people tend to say on these occasions is all protocol observed. It's a term I don't like, but let me observe it anyway. I would like to thank the Director of Justice for Children for inviting me to come and speak on this occasion, and in particular to launch what I see as a very important publication. I don't think anybody's left me very much to say, which is of great benefit to all of you, because we've already had a pretty thorough analysis of what is contained in this publication. And I was delighted to see that there was space for the views of young people. I shan't say children, because they didn't quite look like children to me, although legally they would be defined as children, I assume, those from the junior parliament. Because I think it is very important that we are able to understand how complex a situation we have, not only within Zimbabwe, but globally, on this whole issue of sexual intercourse, the appropriate age at which it can be commenced. We all have different views on this. I guess if I asked around this tent, I can't say room, I would get different answers from different people as to when they commenced exploratory measures in relation to sexual intercourse. It's very important that we understand, and I think this came out very clearly when the junior parliamentarians were actually making their presentation, and that is, I can't manage something if I don't understand it. There is no point in us having complex laws in place which only the lawyers can access, which are confused and confusing, which is what in many ways was presented to you this afternoon. It's been a very patch and make do situation. The age of marriage was apparently finally set, and it dates, if I'm not incorrect now, from the 16th of January 2016 to be 18, regardless of the form of marriage that we're talking about. But when we talk about marriage in Zimbabwe, we talk about a minimum of 3 different forms. And the law is inconsistent. And that inconsistency, as you heard earlier, leads to confusion, leads to the inability of individuals, both adults, I would suggest, and young persons, and even children, to know exactly what their legal situation is, what they are permitted to do, and with whom they are permitted to actually do it. So for me, I find this publication to be absolutely vital in terms of pulling together all these multiple strands of intertwined legalities, illegalities, and constrictions and restrictions on how individuals are able to engage with each other within the framework of sexual activity. What I find at a conceptual level very important in this document is that it looks at the perspectives around sex, reproductive rights, sexual health, information about sexual activity from a gendered perspective. It does not just talk about the girl child. It talks about the girl child and the boy child. It talks about what I guess all of us may remember having done once before we reached the age of 18, having a little exploration of the equipment of the other sex. Nobody recognizes that little exploration. Are we all innocent? We know nothing about this. I remember when I was at school, which you can tell from my hair is a very long time ago, the only thing we were ever taught about reproduction was reproduction in the frog. Now, reproduction in the frog leads you to a rather peculiar notion of how sex takes place. First, we probably need a swimming pool. We need eggs to be laid, and for the male to swim over the top of it and somehow or other dispense sperm. That was thought to be enough information. And I guess the only other thing we were ever told was no. But I think we've moved so far beyond there in our thinking around reproduction and reproductive rights, health issues. We know how critical education is to both males and females. We know that we have to look at the world not just through a negative set of lenses, but through a set of positive lenses that help us to see what it is we need to do, what it is we need to provide, the kind of dialogue that we need to have from multiple perspectives with multiple sectors of our society. There is no point in having children, whoops, didn't mean to say that, young persons, young adults, males and females who are under the age of 18, having a considerable amount of knowledge about reproduction, about, if you like, contraception, whether it is contraception itself or whether, as was asked for, please can we have more condoms? But if we're going to talk about condoms, please can we have female condoms as well? Because it's extremely important that it's not just the youth, if I can use that word, who know what is going on. Because inevitably there is a clash between the older generation who has a very different view of how one ought to be conducting oneself, a very different view about family and family values to the ones that I think we are seeing now emerging. It really matters that every child gets the best possible opportunity to have a full education. Anything that compromises that, to me, presents significant problems. Yet, we have so many conflicting frameworks as to what should happen and how it should happen around sexual and reproductive rights that one begins to wonder, how is it that someone can assert the right which is very clearly stipulated in the Constitution, to a basic education, whatever that means, because even that has not been adequately defined. The right to health has to be intertwined with the right to education. The right to one's dignity, the right to be protected from exploitation, whether one is an adult or a child, because it's not only children who can be sexually exploited. It's extremely important, therefore, that a comprehensive approach is presented, which does what I think is the most important analytical process when you come to look at issues around human rights. And reproductive and health rights are, without a doubt, as was explained earlier by Musa, are fundamental human rights. It's extremely important that we understand these issues from the point of view of males and females, that we understand it across the entire sexual continuum, right? Sometimes you have very voluptuous women and very macho men. Sometimes you have people who are not quite so clearly identifiable. But it's a vital issue that when we look at individuals' rights, that we understand it from what I call, and I'm going to leave the microphone, I'm probably not allowed to leave it behind, from a central perspective. So imagine that all the males are sitting on this side of the room, oops, the tent, and all the females are sitting on this side of the tent. We cannot look at one without the other, because we live in a sexually integrated society. There's not one person, I suspect, in this space at the moment who is not the result, who is not the result of actual sex, is there? We would not be here if it were not for sex. So let's get realistic about it. Let's accept that it is something we need to address and to manage. And that's why, now I'm going to have two microphones. That's why I think it's extremely important that this publication has been produced. There will be people who will disagree with it. There will be people who will wholeheartedly approve of it. But for me, it is a lobbying document. And it's a lobbying document to have a comprehensive, integrated, thoroughly thought through legislative framework, which is easily accessible using simple language, not the heretofore, afters, and whatevers, which and the provisos that lawyers so love. They pay us by the word, you know. So that rather makes us somewhat prolix. We do need to have a very clear, very well-defined framework which addresses children's rights in a clear and integrated fashion. Law librarians or new law librarians who are not lawyers, when they come into law libraries, or at least before we had computers and our own laptops, could not understand why there'd be 10 or so books lined up in front of a law student. And they'd want to say, put them back on the shelf. You can't have them all at once. To which the answer is, well, I'm really sorry, but we actually need them all at once, because we don't have them all at once. We can't track all of these little fragmented bits and pieces that are there. And this is why, in many ways, we have such a messy, fragmented, unclear, and frankly embarrassing at times, if you're a lawyer, mess of law. And I should say that it's not just around this area, but it's around many areas. And we're supposed to be aligning all our laws with the Constitution. Well, in a very peculiar, obscure argument, they've already been aligned, but it's really, nobody knows what that alignment actually is. So it's important that we are able to have these rights, these cautionary issues, these generalized debates, a perspective from the ground, from what is going on, how are families coping, how are young people coping, how are communities coping with these issues, up to looking at it from the highest levels of government. It's important that we have documents like this which feed into and which inform ongoing debate and dialogue. I'm going to finish at that point because I'm sure you don't want me to go on for the rest of the afternoon. But importantly, this is a document that must feed into that coherent, cohesive process of law reform, which will address the difficulties of reproductive rights and health and sexual rights with regard not only to the younger members of our communities, but to our global perspective on how to move forward in these areas. One thing that Musa said was, this is a global problem. Zimbabwe does not always have to be behind the times. We can be ahead of the times. And it's this kind of work, thank you, Petronella, and thank you to the organization for putting out such a readable and stimulating document, which should, we hope, come to a meaningful fruition in some understandable, simple, straightforward legislation which can be world-leading. Thank you.
I think for me, my biggest take home there was the combination of education and health. There's a strong take home there and a strong cry for help for these ministries to work together so that they realize and make sure that we have comprehensive sexuality education in its totality for our young people. And while the conversations are still flowing and while people are still thinking, I think it would be prudent that we do not have the discussion, which I see was the next after the music break, but we go straight into the rich presentation we're going to be given by SAT. So, ladies and gentlemen, may we please put our hands together for SAT. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As I hear all these voices and voices of what's happening in workshops around issues of age of consent, I hear Ngoti ga, ga, ga from the young people. I hear voices from people for child protection. Either they are shaking their heads or nodding. I don't know exactly where they stand. I hear the voices of lawyers. We need to align these policies. What are they? Child protection is saying we need to protect the child. The lawyers are saying let's align the legal frameworks on health. Let's also look at the legal frameworks that protect the child. What are the voices of young people saying? Young people are not a homogeneous group. Just this morning, as our junior parliamentarians were speaking, one of them said, we want to support that the age of consent to sex be lifted to 18 so that we are more mature and we understand the consequences of sex. And one of them said, well, we are sexually active. Give us the condoms. And we at SAT, we sit back and say, what do the young people want? Do they understand what age of consent is? Do they understand the consequences of choice and responsibility? And I think this document is a really good starting point. And as SAT, young people is our business, looking at the issues of sexual and reproductive health. And for the last couple of years, we also conducted a literature review, which I'm happy to say is very much part of this document that JCT is launching today. We are actually pleased to see that we have now more players who are looking around the issues of consent in our country. A lot of things to digest. Musa mentioned it's complex. Definitely, it's very complex for us to be able to get to an agreement to say this is what the young people want. And remember, it's the agreement of young people, not of civil society organizations or of the older generation. It's the voices of the young people. What are they saying? And not only the voice of Ashley, who lives in urban Harare. What is the voice of that young person in the rural areas? As SAT, we're also working in prisons, working with young men who've been incarcerated over the issue of statutory rape. And Professor Stewart mentioned that some of these legal frameworks, who knows about them? Young people don't. And a young man, when he listens to his case or his verdict being read in court, he's like, you know, like, what is this magistrate talking about? I've never heard about, I can't have sex with someone who's younger than 16. So even our young people need a comprehensive sexuality education. They need to understand what's in our frameworks and what are the consequences of having sex. I was looking at this and I was saying to my colleague, oh my goodness, I just need to cover abstinence and say, what is the only way to guarantee against unintended pregnancies and STIs of our young people? What is the only way that we need to do that? At SAT, we talk about the demographic dividend. If you look at what people estimate what's happening in populations, year in, year out, the growth in population, then we say, oh my goodness, we need to talk contraceptives. We need to talk condoms. How can we prevent our young people from unintended pregnancies, also to avoid the demographic dividend? So today, we wish to congratulate JCT for the launch of this paper, which becomes an additional resource to all those engaging in the age of consent. And as such, we will continue to work with JCT in partnership on issues around sexual and reproductive health until we actually manage to get a legal framework that will support our young people, protect our young people, and even though we want the Romeo and Juliet clause, I think I can hear, I have a favorite colleague in the Ministry of Education. And I hope she won't mind even saying her name, Miss Nyanungo. She says, what are young people doing with sex anyway? You know, her voice was very strong the last time we had a debate. And Ashley argued very strongly to say whether you like it or not as older people, we are having sex. So protect us. Okay? So protect us. So I'd like to say to JCT, well done. And let's continue on the fight with the young people, letting the young people lead so that we present their voices adequately. Thank you.
I gather a lot of us have got opinions on this situation that we're facing as a country, and we have ideas of our own on how we can definitely find a solution, and a lasting one, to this situation we have. And as a crossover now, I think to strike the iron while it's still hot, it's prudent that we just discuss what we have heard today, what we think we should do and what you think the way forward should be. But then I'm going to be a bit biased because I am seeing a very interesting person in the crowd. And this person is very key in our asks and the way forward. And this person is a representative of the Parliamentary Health Portfolio. I hope he doesn't mind me putting him on the spot, but I would like to give him the mic, have him introduce himself, and then tell us exactly what his position is on the age of consent.
Right. Thank you. Good afternoon to you all. My name is Honorable Chinyanganya, Member of Parliament for Kadoma Central. I'm not a member of the Health Committee, but I'm a friend of the Health Committee. We have limitations as to the number of committees that we can sit in. I sit in 3, but by virtue of my legal background, the chairperson of the Health Committee saw it fit that I become a member of the, a friend of the Health Committee. Rather, I am a de facto member of the Health Committee. I'm glad to see Professor Julius Stewart, my former lecturer at GZ, Women's Law course, and Dr. Zabora, my classmate, my former classmate at GZ. I'm also pleased to see that we have junior parliamentarians here, ladies and gentlemen, invited guests. The age of consent is a really topical issue that is come up, and it's hot in Parliament as we speak. Last week, we visited Mutare together with the Health Committee, and we had interactions with commercial sex workers. Some said they became sexually active as young as 12, 13, 14. What touched my heart is there was someone who is now around 25, and now she has 5 children at the age of 25. I think she has 5 children at that age because the law, she was led down by the law. Because at the age of 12, she was sexually active, but she did not have access to contraception methods. Because if she went to a clinic or to a hospital at the age of 12, she would have needed her guardian or her parent so that, because as a minor, she cannot access contraceptives. So this actually opened the minds of us parliamentarians, all the members of Parliament who attended that event. So I can assure you that we are moving in the right direction, and we need to continue with this kind of discussions so that we can be informed. The laws that were made before us, they were made for them, not for us. The young parliamentarians here, they have said what they want, and it's critical to take their views on board when we make laws, because we shouldn't make laws according to what we feel is good for them, but we need to hear what is best for them. The Education Amendment Bill is not at the consultation stage anymore. We debated it in May, and last week we closed debate, and it's going through the final phase next week. So I'm glad that the majority of parliamentarians have taken on board the issue of allowing pregnant girls to continue with their education, because it was disadvantageous to them to be expelled from school. So I think it's a plus for the girl child. It is also critical that when we are having our consultation meetings to have views from those who are affected by the laws that will be crafting, because it really informs the debate, and it will capture what they want, because it would not be prudent like to be constantly amending laws. So if we capture the views of everyone who matters, it will mean that we will not have this discord in the laws, like the lacuna that we have now between the Constitution and the Child Act, the Marriages Act. So when we will be discussing the Marriages Bill, I encourage all the groups that are affected to come on board so that they air their views, so that the laws that we'll make in the end will solve the problems that we have, and no one will cry at the end of the day because they have captured all the views. The issue of the sexual and reproductive care, it's coming to Parliament very soon, and I'm sure we are going to take them on board so that the girl child is not disadvantaged in any way. And also the age of consent issue, we are going to put it at rest, and so that it can be aligned with the Constitution. So those are my few remarks. I thank you.
Thank you very much. But I think from what we have heard, we want to put the issue of age of consent to rest. But then what and where does it start? Why is it even an issue to begin with? Personally, I think it's a matter of parent-to-child communication. Imagine a world where we could speak to our parents freely about anything and everything and tell them that we are actually sexually active, tell them that, Mama, I need contraception, tell them that, Daddy, I'm going through my period and I need pads, tell them that I now have a boyfriend and with my boyfriend we do A, B, C, D, E, and have them tell us, Manangu, if this happens, go this direction. If that happens, take this precaution. If that precaution does not help, this is the next step. Do we still need young people accessing services without their parents' consent in a situation like that? Or do we see a situation where parents take their children, walk with them the road of their teenagehood, walk with them the streets of their growing up, walk with them through the SRH of their life? Do you think if we had better parent-to-child communication, we would need nurses that end up becoming parents and not nurses within the facilities and start preaching to us when we want to access contraception? Do you think there would be a need for that nurse to wear 2 caps and to be depressed when they are actually thinking, oh, but this is a young girl that could be my daughter. Let me just tell her that she should abstain. I'd like to hear your views. I just thought I'd tap into that dimension and hear what everybody thinks. Any volunteer before I pick out based on my own criteria that I'm already stewing in my mind? Because I think the major issues that we're hearing now are the young people's actions versus the expectations of the older generation.
Hi everyone, my name is Tinatu. I work at the Law Society of Zimbabwe. I just want to comment on what you were saying about nurses that are not very helpful to young girls, because I think sometimes girls go there and they want help, and then instead they're kind of guilt-tripped into like, why are you doing this, why are you doing that, and then they're kind of slut-shamed. But then, just like abortion, like the criminalization of abortion doesn't stop abortion, it just increases unsafe abortions. So instead, we're having these young girls going to places that they shouldn't be going for sexual advice or whatever, instead of the institutions that are put to make them feel safe. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that one. And I think the reason why we are talking about this service provider attitudes and how they relate to us is also bringing us back to the age of consent itself. Because right now, most of them are hiding behind the age of consent and wearing the parent cap and saying, but you are not even allowed by law to access these services. So this is why we are discussing the age of consent. I had seen a mature hand, and I'd like to give that alternate from young to the older so that we hear different views. Thank you.
Thank you. I think these are very interesting debates, but sorry that I also have a question which I have to add. But maybe before I add the question, let me just give some idea on how best we can proceed on these very soft but sensitive issues. It is very easy for us to mount a policy advocacy thing based on technical knowledge. But what I have seen is that you end up with a very big gap between the policies and the implementation, because the issue of perceptions is so strong. And yet when we talk about these policies, when we make suggestions about technical solutions, we never really go into a serious analysis of what are the perceptions of the older generation, what are the perceptions of the younger generation when it comes to this subject matter. I think it is something which is critical, it is something which we have to look at. Secondly, I see a very strong gender dimension to this issue, and I don't know how it can be addressed. I have had the opportunity to go to our prison about 3-4 times. And one question which really comes to my mind is, why is it that it is always the boy child who the magistrate, the learned magistrate, always finds at fault? Does it mean that when we talk of sexual offenses, it's by default the male child? What is really the issue? What are the dynamics about this? And when I spoke to some of the boys in these prisons, they still receive letters from their girlfriends. Yet they are in prison because it's statutory rape, it's something else, the words which the learned magistrates use. And it's really, I have not seen a single girl in that prison. Yes, you have thousands of these boys in there. And maybe those who are going to mount this advocacy around this legislation should really think about this very strong gender dimension to it and how best it can be addressed. Thank you.
Do we have reactions to that before I give my own? I'm always told that I talk too much, so as a facilitator, I'm practicing listening at every platform, although I'm burning inside as well.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Munyoro. I'm a medical practitioner. I would like to go back to this young lady and apologize to her and for all those who have experienced that judgment or an attitude or perception that they receive when they get to a healthcare facility, where somebody would say, why are you even thinking about sex? Have you finished reading your books or whatever, right? But that said, I work in a clinic where we prescribe ARVs for HIV positive children. So whatever the age of consent, in my opinion, whatever the age of consent is, we have to be able to provide sexual and reproductive health care services to those children, whatever the age is. Because like Sat was saying, we have to protect the children. We have to protect them, not from older generations, but even from themselves. If you understand what I'm saying. 6% of the HIV prevalence in Zimbabwe is actually children. or young people. So they're normal people, even though they're HIV positive. They're 16, they're 15. They're going to want to have sex. They're going to try and have sex. But then if they're denied these reproductive health care services, they're going to infect their colleagues. They're going to infect, this Juliet is going to infect her Romeo. And it's just going to, the cycle is going to continue. This Romeo is going to infect a Juliet, who will then be married by someone who's older, who's going to get infected, and the HIV prevalence will not go down. So I'm just here to say, whatever the age of consent is, sexual and reproductive health care services should not be denied to young people, because we will not win the fight against HIV. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. If only we had all our practitioners having the same sentiments and sharing and actually putting them to practice. There was a reaction this side?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the issue of consent and sexual health services, I think the backbone or the root key is when it comes in African society, there's an issue of, there are too many taboos and barriers. There are many do's and don'ts in our African society. So especially if you would want to talk about these things, you then cannot talk about them, but then you have to do them anyway. So I think that is the first thing we have to do. That we have to change the perception. We have to analyze the status quo about how people view the issue of sex and engaging in sex especially in Zimbabwe. I can give you an example of what happened just right now when we went to the MFS booth over there. I was with my colleagues and my friends, and I went and I took a bunch of condoms, and then all my friends were like, "Oh, what are you doing?" So like we need to change that kind of reaction, because like people, just like the professor over there said, like people shame or make sex a taboo, but it's what God has here. Everybody standing here is an evidence. He seeks. So like it's something that happens. So people do not have to make it a taboo or make it seem like something that's wrong.
Thank you. I feel like this young man has been in my spaces so long because I've also been talking about how we have made sex such an amazing thing that really takes up so much of our days and our lives, thinking and planning and trying to have young people avoid it. Yet if we just told them about it and showed them that it can actually even happen in 2 to 3 seconds to 10 minutes or 5 seconds, and it's over. It's not a big deal. It's just sex. Maybe if it wasn't that sacred, they wouldn't really be wanting to explore so much. I'd like to hear a younger person give us, young both at heart, in stature, and in all dimensions, to give us her views.
Okay, hello. My name is Yolanda. I'm a peer educator from MSF. So just to comment, I was just like, to those who are indulging or engaging into sexual activities, are they asking for consent from their parents before they do sex? So why need consent if they want to access SRH services? And another comment from the Junior Parliament, not only from Bare that are sexually active, are involved into sexual activities. Since I'm a PhD, they work in the adolescent-friendly health clinic in Mbare. Other children from other communities are also accessing SRH services, which means it's a shortage. So I think if it might help to create adolescent-friendly health services in the different community for young education to access, because the word abstinence doesn't exist in nowadays. Thank you.
I see everyone is having their own independent view, but there was a burning question that was asked by the gentleman that spoke about gender and how this issue is really a gender issue as well. I'd like to hear us really delve into that and maybe comment more about that issue, especially considering the Romeo and Juliet clause and how it's functioned. We've heard about it, and maybe we should apply it and protect our boy child as well. What are your thoughts on that? And maybe you want to respond to something different? Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Tawanda from Childline. Last year we did an adolescent intimate partner relationship for, research looking at violences that happens within a relationship to these adolescents. What was very critical in the findings is that sexual debut goes back to 10 to 12 years. So my contribution is, I think these young children just need to access sexual reproductive health care without the presence of their parents or guidance, because it's a taboo to discuss these issues between a parent and a child, leading into pregnancies kana mwana ari sexually active, or leading into STIs and HIV, because pane barrier between a parent and a child. So I think the health practitioners, we need your support in terms of service provision kuvana who are below the age of consent, 16, limiting also being professional, limiting the judgmental effect, and according to counseling, I think one component in counseling is never judge. You give a service without judging. So I think medical practitioners, we need your help in giving services without judging. Yes, there's a component of counseling where you tell a child what my consequences sexual activities, but the decision to be sexually active goes back to themselves because it's their right according to sexual reproductive health rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we could talk about this all day and really delve more and more into it. And I am just going to take 2 more burning hands, and then we can then close this discussion and people can then discuss more over lunch and refreshments. So 2 more burning hands. Okay, I'll make them 3. 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so maybe let me start at the far corner because we've been having so much from this angle.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I'm Stembiso Soswe from CATCH. And as CATCH, our main mandate is to deal with children in conflict with the law. And each and every day when we go to court, doing our court monitoring, we deal with children in conflict with the law. And whenever we do our home visits, we are dealing with these children in conflict with the law. So what I've realized is that, where does the child come from? That's the first question that we should ask ourselves. A child comes from the family. So before we come into such meetings, before we address issues that have to do with so many people meeting and talking about the child, let's ask ourselves, Kuti, as a family, what are our values as a family? As a mother, how would you take it? What lessons are we bringing into our children? Each and every day, what discussions do we allow our children, what do we talk about as a family? And if we address this from the family background, we would not have so many problems. And as parents, if I may ask one of the parents that are here, Kuti, if your 12-year or 14-year-old child would tell you or would bring a condom, or if you find a condom from their bag, what is your take? So as a nation, let's address this from a family perspective. Also, and let's take away so many beliefs and taboos that we find in the grooming or the messages that we got at an early age. Because what I've said and what I'll always say is that let's go to the reality. What is happening on the ground versus what the laws that we have. In Zimbabwe, it looks like we have this law for certain children and we have different children that we're dealing with. So let's try and match our law and what is happening on the ground. Thank you.
So there are issues of socialization and the need to unlearn what we have been taught and told about sex from a tender age. And I think we also need to address the gap that is there when we talk of the planning, the policies, and then the implementation gap. I think the reason why most of our medical practitioners are not really implementing, besides the fact that they're being parents, is also that the law does not protect them. If at all there are consequences resulting from that service that they would have given. Imagine a situation a service provider gives a young person the Jadel, and then the young person reacts. Who is going to be sued? Who will go to prison for that? It is the service provider. So maybe that's another implementation gap, and that our policymakers need to address. We need a law that will protect the service provider such that they can implement and give their best shot at their work.
Thank you. Mine is to just commend Justice for Children for this publication, and it's a step in the right direction, because for long we've thought sexual reproductive health and rights to be mutually exclusive with the law, when in fact both need each other. For example, the moment you talk about sexual reproductive health rights, and of course the message that is there, and the message that is, I saw something written, true love waits, no sex before marriage. And I'm thinking, as an SRHR expert, the moment I see that, I put a wall, because that message seems to be inconsistent with what I represent and what I envisage the society to go towards. So I'm loving that JCT is taking upon itself to kind of bridge the gap between law and SRHR, because both need each other. So thank you, Musa, and it's quite, and the entire Justice for Children team. It's also refreshing to read, I read parts of the document, to read something that does not have facet kind of jargon. So I think that way we'll be able to access the language in a better way, and also be able to know that the law is indeed for us, because there's this gap where people think the law is meant for specific people and is meant to be read or used for specific communities. So thank you so much for that. And I'm also waiting for the response or the concern raised by the say they, whether girls are also in prison for the same offenses, because I'm sure that boys are not immune to sexual violations. So I'm hoping, through your persuasion facilitator, I'm really hoping that the professor will get that one to answer. Yeah, thank you.
Clearly, Professor, you've been put in a tight spot, and I do the will of the people. So after this one, do prepare for that fire answer and response for us.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Susan Sonza, and I'm coming from the Young People's Network on Sexual Reproductive Health, HIV and AIDS, under National AIDS Council. Basically, when we heard that we are coming to this platform, answering to the question of what does the young people really want, and then those contributions that was given by MEM from SAT, we sat down to say most young people do not have one consensus and one common goal on this age of consent. Someone is saying 12, someone is saying 15, and the other one is saying 18, and the other one, let it remain and let it rise. So we had our proposed solutions, and on the age of consent to comprehensive sexuality education and services, we said that there should be no age limit with regards to accessing services, as long as the young person has a need for that service. On age of consent to marriage, we acknowledged and applaud the current legal age of marriage, which is at 18 years. But we, however, had to take time and read the marriage bill that is currently that has currently been discussed, and people saying a lot of things about it. And we had to recommend that on the penalties, if someone has married or a child below the age of 18, let the penalty be stiffer, and possibly a standard of 10 years. The current penalty in the marriage bill includes a fine of 2,000 RTGS dollars and a maximum of 5 years, which is too low and sometimes too deterrent for us. Any marriage to a person below the age of 18 should be clearly stated as a case against the state to ensure that the state has a legal basis to intervene in the absence of a complaint. Age of consent to sex. We say the age of consent to sex should be raised to 18, aligning to the legal age of marriage. And this should be enacted with the Romeo and Juliet clause to address the boy child, and with a ceiling of at least 2-year age gap difference between minors. And the proposed solutions we agreed upon are these as the Young People's Network. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that response and reaction. I think it's really opening up more conversation that the time cannot really permit us to contain right now, but I'm sure people can have a chance to then discuss more after we have heard from... She's already murmuring. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm trying to recollect which recent section it is in our law which looks at this issue of age mates who have sexual intercourse. And of course, normally the way in which sexual intercourse between age mates manifests itself is that the girl falls pregnant. Very obviously, if you know from the perspective of both parties how to avoid pregnancy, very often none of these issues will actually arise. But to come back to the question that I was apparently asked, as far as I know, there is a recent provision in the law which does give a discretion as to whether or not sexual intercourse between age mates who are at or under the age of consent. The decision whether or not to prosecute has been taken away from the prosecutors, and it now lies with a probation officer who will make a determination as to which of the parties, if either, ought to be charged with an offence. And I think that's a very important point to take note of. Which of the parties? Probably neither, because if it's largely experimental and exploratory, it's really how we learn and how many of us must also have learned as children ourselves. But, and I think this is the most important point, the presumption is, and it's a very problematic presumption, it's not even very clearly articulated. It's one of those implicit assumptions in our thinking, which is that girls are seduced, boys are the seducers. And once you start coming at it from that biased, gendered, in fact, it's really a sexed perspective, you will inevitably come to the conclusion, and that's apparently why there are so many boys in this situation, that the boy is to blame. Conceptually, it's very hard to envisage a woman raping a male. But the word rape really isn't the word that we should be using in many of these contexts. It's sexual abuse. Has she been a party to his arousal? And then to what extent are they mutually responsible? Or to what extent can you say that the female has also very actively brought on and contributed to this end result, which is why I think looking at all of these issues from a seriously gendered perspective and understanding that there's no use telling the girl child, don't play with boys, if you haven't explained to her what you mean by boys, what you mean by play with. And she can say to you, but I was only talking to him, or we, in fact, weren't playing. I don't call this play. So I think we have to come back to the point of view that it's long since time we started seriously talking about these issues, and it's this kind of publication which sets it up. There will be hue and cry, I can assure you, when the Education Amendment Bill goes through and sex education is actively reintroduced in our schools. There will be an enormous kerfuffle because this is not something that people want to talk about, but it is a perfectly normal human function. And we have to look at it from that point of view and make sure that both sides are protected. A boy, well, of course, he can't get pregnant, but he can certainly become HIV positive. He can certainly suffer sexual abuse. So let's get a nice balanced way in which we look at all of these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Being a passionate person about the age of consent, and if I really let my things get out of hand and let it go my way, we would sleep here discussing this issue. But then I think we have come to the end of our program, and it has been fruitful, and it has been very much thought-provoking, and I'm sure the more we read into the publication, we will definitely have more questions and delve into finding out what more can be done and how can it be done. Up next, we're going to have our closing remarks. And the closing remarks are going to be followed shortly by a music presentation from the Marimba Band as we go for our refreshments and more networking and more dialogue. Please, let's talk more about this. So our closing remarks are going to be coming from Dr. James Sebora, the Dean of Faculty of Law from Zimbabwe Ezekiel Guti University.
How are you? Do I use this one or this one? I hope you can hear me. I want to first of say, all protocol observed, right? We were listening to these debates and discussions, and when I was sitting there, I realized that this is a bigger problem than what I had envisaged, right? It's an elephant in the room. It's something that is right in our bedrooms, in our dining rooms, in our families, in our villages, right? I'm thinking that maybe another discussion is on the drivers, like I think she was saying it, right? The family is the source of values that, that children grow up with. But the family itself is also influenced by religion, right? These debates should also be discussed in churches, apostolic, right? Catholics, AFMs, IOJA, right? Because these organizations have not held enough discussions on sex. They have not held enough discussions on sex education, on access to sexual and reproductive health services, right? There are many, even culture on its own, right? It's another driver to sex, views, myths, beliefs about sex. So it is my hope that these discussions, we take them back home. We are able to discuss with our parents, with our church leaders, with our cultural leaders, traditional leaders themselves, right? Tradition and culture influence and shape behavior more than what you can even believe. These days, churches, apostolic, prophets, right? If a person as big as me, right, can go to a big church and I'm told to eat grass, right? And I eat grass. Eh? A gentleman like myself, I believe that if I eat this grass, I will have children, right? What about children themselves? So religious beliefs are at the center of some of these drivers to behavior. My role today is not very difficult. It's just to say the closing remarks, but I think I should also summarize the main take-home points that I had. Before I even begin, I want to thank JCT for this noble initiative, Petronella and team. Thank you very much. I think they deserve a round of applause for this. I wanted to clap hands in the mic, right? When I was doing my master's in Durban, there were a group of kids who, when the lecturer is late, they would play their cell phone in those mics, those big lecture theaters, right? So the dean would know. They would play really loud house music. So if the dean wants to know whether the lecturer is there, they will begin playing those house music. So they will play their cell phones in the mics. And then you find yourself in hot soup by the dean. So I wanted to clap right in the mic. So Petronella, thank you very much. We want you to produce more and more of these publications. We want you to distribute them to schools, medical clinics, or other service providers. We think that, I really believe that you're doing a fantastic job. This is not fiction, it's a real thing, right? This is something that is happening in our society, in our families. Musa's argument, Musa's presentation was very legal, but I think, to summarize in one sentence what he said, the law is confused, isn't it? If the law is confused, Parliament is confused as well. Honorable, right? You have a job to do. We are happy you are here. I don't know why we have to debate about age of consent, right? The Constitution is clear that under 18, you're a child, isn't it? But the Constitution does not speak about sex. It speaks of marriage. The law doesn't want to say a child, it don't say a young person. Come on, it's a controversial take, that one. Who is a young person? 40 years old? 50 years old? I want to call myself young, isn't it? Why can't you just say child? Then the extramarital nonsense comes in, right? So the law is confused. There's massive confusion. There's a problem with the law, right? And if the problem is coming from parliamentarians, big problem, because they are the ones that amended the law, right? When I was talking to Honorable Mchineripi, I was like, can we amend the Constitution so that we have particular qualifications for MPs? Let's say 5 O-levels, let's say a degree. And you know what he said? He said you won't succeed because it's Parliament who votes for this law. It's them, illiterate guys, who are going to vote. So you won't succeed, right? So if we have parliamentarians who are saying we want 12-year-olds, then we want them to vote to say that let's get it up to 18 years, right? So we want a parliament that is proactive, that listens to what we are saying, to what society wants, right? Then the junior parliament, I think my young man was misquoted when he said we want condoms, right? His point was we want services, we want sexual and reproductive health services, right? Including condoms, right? So give it to us, isn't it? They really presented well. I think they will make great ambassadors in the future, but their message was clear, right? We don't want to be bogged down by this sex. Let's have sex, let's not have sex, right? We want education, we don't want it now, right? Let us grow. So advocate for a law that speaks to this kind of message. Prof. Stewart was very clear. The law is fragmented. The law is not speaking to each other, right? This one says this one goes this way. I don't know why. Maybe because we've got various cultural beliefs about sex. This culture believes this one believes this, right? If there's a culture that says, for you to be called a grown man, you must be circumcised at age 13, right? And then, coming from the circumcision you tell that person that you are still a child. Are you following me? You are not, right? If you have a culture that says, for you to be called a grown girl, there must be, first of all, female genital mutilation. And then you are mutilated. And then down the hill, let's say you go to a hill and then you are mutilated. You are now down here, right? You meet me and then I say, you are still a child. Because that's what the law says. There's a conflict between the law and culture, isn't it? So we have to address these problems, right? Cultural, customary law, rituals, right? There's a lot of fragmentation and it's embarrassing. We need to sort and fix the legal framework so that it speaks to what we want. It is more centered on protection. It is more centered on the interest of the girl child. I want to end here. Sat, thank you very much for the sexual health education call. We like that mantra, as well as the resolutions by Young People's Network. Are you here? Can you stand up? Where is that lady? Your resolutions were quite progressive. I think we will go by them as well. We hope that you produce a book You invite us like JCT has done, and you support whatever angle you take, as long as it is in the interest of the protection of the child. Thank you very much.
In primary school, when you'd have done something very good, the teacher would say, well done, our clever girl, right? So I think we deserve to give Justice for Children that well done, eh? Let's give them that 3 great pom-poms. 1, 2, 3, go! I did it on the mic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today. It has been great to have you, and it has been a great experience to share with Justice for Children today on their publication. I think right now we may be able to break and have our refreshments. I'm sure we'll get directions from the ushers as to where to head. Without much words shared, thank you very much, Justice for Children. It has been wonderful. Sorry, while we're going there, may the marimba guys please give us more of their melodious music, please.
Lighthouse, a division of SlyMedia, are available at your disposal for your wedding videos and pictures. Our experience is second to none. To view our sample or to book us, call or WhatsApp on 0773 684 183 or email slymediastreaming@gmail.com. Lighthouse, a division of SlyMedia, are available at your disposal for your wedding videos and pictures. Our experience is second to none. To view our sample or to book us, call or WhatsApp on 0773 684 183 or email slymediastreaming@gmail.com.